On episode 202 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Dr. Thomas Cowan and discuss his book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/202. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you here today. My interview with Dr. Cowan went really well. I really enjoyed it. I think you're going to learn a lot from him. He has studied and written about a ton of different medical subjects to include nutrition, homeopathy, and herbal medicine. He is the principal author of The Fourfold Path to Healing and co-author with Sandy Fallon of Nourishing Traditions' book of baby and child care. He's also he was a founding board member for the Weston A. Price Foundation. So really fascinating guy. And his book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, is a really interesting book. I encourage you to get into it. But let's go ahead and have this conversation with Dr. Cowan first. So Dr. Cowan, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, you know, this book, it was funny because when I received it, it was relatively thin. I'm like, oh, cool. This is a good 2-3 hour read for me. I'm going to enjoy this. I like the principle of the book. And I'm like, this is going to be a really good read. And then I really started getting into it. And it was almost like, you know, they tell you when they triple, double distill the liquor. I'm not a big liquor person, but they say the more they distill it, the better it gets. Kind of, you know, the longer they age a wine, just those kind of principles. It's almost like you didn't write this book in 4 weeks or 6 months or a year. This book is a culmination of a lot of things.
Yeah. In fact, some of the things which are, in a sense, peripheral to the main point of the book, I must admit I've been sitting on for probably 2 or 3 decades. So, yes, there's various parts of this that have been brewing for literally decades.
So I could see that distillation in the book because it really was. At points, I'm like, okay, I have to slow down. I'm going to go reread that again because I really want to understand what you're saying here because this was really compelling reading. This was, if you really want to understand the human body, you really want to understand the science behind it. And then some of the, and I don't want to say softer because that's really not a good description of it, but it's just understand why we feel what we feel about our bodies. It was just really kind of that thing. And you use the term woo-woo like a couple times during the book, but I'm like, no, this is not woo-woo. This is something that all of us inherently feel. We're afraid to express because there's not a science behind it.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting about that word. That was a word, I must say, that the editor, who was actually a very great editor, I must say, she was really helpful. She put that word in. It wasn't my word. But I had some history with that word, not to get off on the subject here, but now that you bring up that word, there was 2 times in my career that I was invited by the doctors at a hospital I was affiliated with to give what's called grand rounds, which is basically when the doctors of a hospital get together and somebody, usually from the outside, presents on a subject. But they knew I was into some different things. So twice at different hospitals, they asked me to present. And at one point, I mentioned something which was a little bit out of the norm for these guys. And as hard as this is to believe, almost spontaneously, they all started going, woo, like that. I remember thinking to myself, there's like no hope for these people. Because it wasn't even, I mean, I was very careful about what I was saying, and it was all, you know, all these studies and this sort of boring stuff. And it's like, you know, one of the ways to contain dissenters is this intense peer pressure that the group brings to bear on individuals who dissent. And I experienced that dramatically. I mean, so for me, it wasn't worth it. I just basically said,
And I get that. And unfortunately, and no, okay. It's a part of the system. If I'm as a doctor not giving due care, which is what my peers are going to deem due care, because if we end up in a court of law, or in court of medical practice, as it be, that's where that's going to come from. So unfortunately, the science has to catch up with reality. And I think one of the things you're doing in this book, which is really awesome, and I really appreciate what you've done here, is you've put forward a theory that we are more than the sum of our parts. And you actually even said that in the book. We are more than the sum of our parts. And anyone that doesn't really believe that is fooling themselves.
Yeah. And not only that, but to get into the deeper issues now, we all say that we believe in science. So a few years ago, I actually took the liberty of looking up the definition of science on Wikipedia, which may not be the best source, but anyways, that was easy for me to do. And I was actually shocked because the definition of science, I believe, and I can't quote it, so I'll paraphrase it a little bit, is something to do with the belief that the only things that should or can be studied are things that are quantifiable. And if you think about that for a minute, so here you are a cardiologist, because that's the subject of the book. And I can guarantee you at some point in your life, you say to somebody, your wife or whatever, spouse or children or cat or somebody, "Oh, I love you with all my heart." Now, if you think about that for a minute, I can guarantee, having dissected hearts in medical school and in seeing hundreds and thousands of catheterizations, there is no such thing as love in the heart. There is no quantifiable love.
But because the heart only weighs what, maybe 4 pounds?
1.1 is the
okay,
average.
okay. I was giving it more credit than it was worth.
Yeah, there's no love in the heart. That doesn't exist. Yet everybody believes in it, even cardiologists. So the whole thing, nobody really believes in that definition of science. Yet for some reason, in certain situations, and I don't know another word for it, but we pretend that that's all that exists. We don't pretend that that's all that exists in our normal lives, because we refer all the time to unseen forces, love and acceptance and empathy. We work on those things. We try to cultivate them, etc. Energy, all these things that are literally not quantifiable. And yet when we come to do medical studies, we pretend that those things don't exist. And that's a bad mistake, because, as I often like to say, the trouble with science is it's not very scientific. And so they make up these bogus theories to try to simplify life and experience. In fact, on a bigger picture, they treat living things as if they're dead material that follow the same laws as chemistry and non-living things. And it's just not accurate. That's all you can say. It's not accurate.
Right. So what I understand is, okay, I have these pipes running through my body called arteries that are carrying blood. And there's cholesterol in my blood. In fact, there's a lot of cholesterol in my blood. And not a lot of triglycerides, but there's a lot of cholesterol. And that cholesterol is clogging up my arteries. And so therefore, I'm due to have a heart attack any day now. But in your book, you're saying, okay, that might not be the actual reason why we're having a heart attack. The reason might be something else. So if you wanted to kind of talk about what does cause heart attacks in kind of a round term, what would that be? Why would I, as a human being, why would my heart die?
Okay, the first thing I would say about that is even what you just said, the fact that cholesterol, if its level is too high in the blood, somehow that forms plaque, which then impedes the blood flow in the major arteries in your heart. The reality is nobody actually believes that anymore. That's been thoroughly debunked, that somehow the cholesterol in your blood settles into the arteries, the coronary arteries, and causes stenosis or blockages. The current theory is there's an inflammatory injury to your blood vessels, and the cholesterol actually seals that inflammatory wound. So the cholesterol is the response, not the cause of that trouble. Just to clarify that for a minute, because now what you're talking about and what I talked about in the book is that this plaque and stenosis, the blood can't get through the coronary arteries theory, has so many holes in it that it's, frankly, kind of ludicrous in a way. So without getting into that whole story, which is, outlined in the book, why that theory is largely incorrect.
Well, I would have taken it down to this, and maybe I'm wrong, and you can correct me. But as I was reading this, I was thinking, okay, wait. So I have this big, big artery that's sitting right on the top of my heart and literally pumping blood through my body. And then it's going to come down these little bitty capillaries where the blood is literally almost going to slow down to zero. And I really like the science because, again, I majored in physics for a little while, so I really like the whole science of the whole thing. But if that blood almost slows to a stop, it would almost tell me that all my capillaries would fill up with cholesterol before my arteries would. Now, maybe I'm completely off base there, but it almost seems like the slowest place that all that would move, if that was truly the gunk that's going to kill me, it would clog up all there.
Exactly. That's a good point, and it doesn't. You don't get plaque buildup in the microcirculation, otherwise known as the capillaries, which is itself an anomaly, because if it's simply just high, lipid cholesterol levels in the blood, why doesn't it happen everywhere? The blood vessels are the same everywhere.
Right. The veins, the arteries, the capillaries, all of it.
Why doesn't it happen everywhere?
It should happen everywhere. So what is causing this heart attack?
So what causes heart attacks is, first of all, we have an autonomic nervous system, which is divided into a sympathetic and a parasympathetic branch. Sympathetic means fight or flight, adrenaline, there's a bear chasing you, run. Parasympathetic means it's mediated by the so-called vagus nerve, and it's the sort of rest and digest, life is good, relax, digest your food, everything's good. We know from heart rate variability testing that well over 90% of people who go on to have heart attacks have a decreased tone of their parasympathetic nervous system in the days, weeks, and months before a heart attack. We also know that things like smoking, high blood pressure, diabetes, and stress all decrease the tone of the parasympathetic nervous system and therefore predispose people to heart attacks. So a person has all those reasons: too much stress, too much high blood pressure, too much blood sugar, diabetes. All that is suppressing their parasympathetic, nourishing nervous system. And then they have an event, either a psychological event or an emotional event or even a physical event. They stress themselves too much and they get a temporary sympathetic nervous system increase. Now, just to say, if your parasympathetic system is normal, a temporary increase in your sympathetic nervous system is called life. And it's called, run away from the bear. That's normal. It shouldn't cause anybody to have a heart attack. But in the face of a suppressed parasympathetic nervous system, then a very key thing happens, which is we start switching where we generate energy from the mitochondria and through respiration, which is the normal way and the most efficient way, to a fermentation kind of metabolism, which is also called glycolysis, which happens not in the mitochondria but in the cytoplasm. And that glycolysis is a very inefficient way to generate energy. In particular, the sugar is converted into lactic acid. Now, we know that this happens all over the body. It happens in your leg. If you go so-called anaerobic or you run out of oxygen, you start fermenting sugar, you generate lactic acid, you get cramps and pain in your leg, and then you can't run anymore. So that's normal. It happens everywhere. The difference is if it happens in the heart, unlike your leg or your spleen or your liver or your kidney or any other organ, the heart can't stop. And so this buildup of lactic acid, which causes pain, which we call angina, then builds up more and more. It causes an acidification of the tissues, which then causes necrosis, otherwise known as breakdown of the cells, and that's what we call a heart attack. Now, the other thing that happens is when the tissue becomes more acidic because of this lactic acid buildup, that actually, because it interferes with the ability of calcium to get into the muscle, it paralyzes the heart muscle in that area, which is exactly what we see on heart tests like stress tests or nuclear scans. We see a paralysis of a certain area of the heart. That's very simply explained by the lactic acid buildup causing calcium not to get into the cells, causing paralysis or decreased movement of that area. The other thing that it does is it tends to create shear pressure because of this lack of movement in that area of the heart, which then breaks off little pieces of clots if they exist, and that exacerbates the problem. But that clot throwing mechanism, which is what the cardiologists, they finger that as the root cause. But the reality is it's a secondary cause or an effect of this primary problem, which is the acidification of the tissue due to a metabolic shift in the cells. And that is the problem with heart attacks.
And, and that kind of resonates with the theory of that DOMS, which is delayed onset muscle soreness, may very well be associated with the same lactic acid buildup. If you push a muscle too hard, it builds up too much lactic acid, which shuts down the ability of the muscle to perform. But a heart can't stop performing, so it keeps pushing through. Whereas your leg or your arm will just lay there and you can't move it. And your body's fine with that, but you can't be fine with your heart not moving.
Exactly. And that's the answer to the riddle of why, if there's plaque everywhere, we don't have leg attacks or spleen attacks. Nobody has those because those organs can stop. The only two that can't are the brain and the heart, and those are the only two that have attacks.
Exactly. Awesome. So now, and again, there's so much I got to dive into here. I just really appreciate your book. But given that I know you only have a certain amount of time that you want to spend with us, because I literally could sit here for probably days and just have a conversation with you. So next time you're out lecturing, please call me because I want to be there. But you put a diet in the back of the book, and I really think, crap, this is the book. I mean, literally, this whole your 6 principles here within the Cowan Heart Diet literally could be a book by itself, but you decided to put it in here too as an appendix to the book. But I would say don't look at it as an appendix. Look at it as a true value add to the book itself, because everything else in the book is golden. And I'm playing on your word golden there, if you don't get that, doctor. But so get the book and you'll know the joke. But you had 6 principles in this book, and I want to go through each of them because I really do think there's value in every one of them. And it'll resonate with my audience here because I talk about these all the time, which is really what's truly blessed about this. So the first one is quality matters. And you're talking specifically about food. So would you kind of go through that?
Right. And, the principle behind this is essentially there's 3 causes or 3 interweaving causes of why people have heart disease. Unfortunately, normal cardiology only recognizes the plaque one. So there's the plaque one, there's the deterioration of the microcirculation one, which they don't recognize, and then there's this imbalance of the autonomic nervous system. So if you're going to develop a diet, it has to influence those 3 things. So, and essentially what we want is a diet that nourishes our autonomic nervous system part, meaning the parasympathetic part, and it feeds the mitochondria, which are the appropriate place that we generate energy, not in the cytoplasm with fermentation. So the first thing is we know that, toxins, whether it's arsenic or DDT or pesticides or whatever, interferes with mitochondrial function. So it's very simple. Eat quality food, which means fresh, local, organic, permaculture, biodynamic, the best quality you can get with the most minerals in it. We know that if you're mineral deficient in all the variety, which is way too complicated. You see, at the bottom of this is, I believe that our bodies are smarter than nutritionists. So I would rather eat food that somebody put everything in the soil, like compost and minerals, etc., and you let the plants and the animals essentially decide what they need, and then you eat those healthy plants and animals. Or a very simple way of saying this, even though it's not understood in conventional medicine, is to think that you can get healthy by eating sick chickens is really crazy.
It's funny because I tell people, I'm like, when you go to a farmer's market and you walk up and you're shaking the hand of the man and woman that grew this food, and you know that they harvested it that season right there in front of you. So if it's vegetable, it's like right there. It may have been frozen if it was the meat because they just really wanted to take care of it. But either way, this is what they're feeding their family. And they're growing up on the land. So they know what they need in their bodies. They're taking care of their children, eating this stuff. So this is stuff you need to feed your family because that's what they're feeding their family.
Yes. And being an avid gardener, you learn that if you don't feed the soil right, you get sick plants.
And thank you for taking your grandchildren out there to do that too. I think that's completely awesome. So the second principle is how to eat vegetables. So we're on the garden. So let's talk about your vegetables.
So this came from the fact that when you look at a traditional diet, which are, by the way, people who never had heart disease, the basic scheme of it was they ate animals for fats and proteins, and some ate fish, and some ate buffalo, and some ate insects and eggs and whatever they could get, and sometimes a combination. So that's for fats and proteins. They ate seed food like nuts, seeds, sometimes grains and beans for carbohydrates and fiber and things. And then they had a wide variety of vegetables. Some of them even documented 120 a year, 15 a day, different colors, different roots, leaves, vegetable fruits like zucchini, squash, etc. And vitamins are not meant to give protein or even necessarily calories. They provide phytonutrients or disease-resisting chemicals, which all animals and humans need. So therefore, the principle is, of the diet is fats and proteins from animals, seeds and nuts for calories and fiber, and as many different types and colors and plant parts and growth habits, annuals, perennials, as vegetables as you can possibly manage in your diet.
And that's what we would have eaten historically, for sure.
That is the traditional diet right there.
Okay. Now, you bring on something else that's near and dear to my heart is intermittent fasting. That's principle 3.
Yes. And that's because it's becoming clear that the part of this that's inflammatory, that is probably the root cause of plaque and the deterioration of the capillaries, is because of essentially having too much insulin from being essentially in an overfed state 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for your whole life. Essentially, it's like if you eat every 8 hours your whole life, you will always be in a fed state and you will always have lots of insulin. And that insulin will tell your body to retain fluid, hence high blood pressure, cause inflammation, hence atherosclerosis. It will tell it to increase weight, et cetera, et cetera. So the solution to that, which I think happened with traditional people in a sense inadvertently, is sometimes you just don't have any food. And if you go more than 12 hours without food, you switch from an insulin anabolic state to a glucagon catabolic state. You break down the fat, you reduce inflammation in your blood vessels, you detoxify, and a whole lot of good things happen. And so the way to get there is to go 12 plus hours without eating. You can eat a little bit of fat if you need to. And so, I and most of my patients, if I can, anywhere from 2 days a week to 6 days a week, you go 18 hours without eating, which generally means you stop eating it after dinner around 6, and you just don't eat anything except water until noon the next day. That makes 18 hours. And for most of us, including myself, that's when I feel the best. I have the most energy. I get the most physical work done. The only caveat I tell people is don't sit around during the morning and look at the refrigerator. You're much better off. Like for me, I do it on days where I go and work in the garden. So I just get up, have a big glass of water, go to the garden, work 4 hours in the garden, and then I'm really hungry, and then I have my vegetable, fat, protein kind of lunch.
So the hormones you're talking about, insulin and glucagon, are really kind of they're sisters, for lack of a better word. So the insulin is literally there to take the blood sugar out of the blood to protect the brain, so there's not too much blood glucose. And glucagon is there to kind of start you building and pouring out muscle, pulling out the energy from the muscle, which is then going to create the ketones that are going to go into the brain to fuel the brain. So the brain needs to be fueled at a certain level all the time. It uses up about 20% of our total energy level. And so those two hormones are the kind of the key hormones that go back and forth, the sister hormones that really control how our brain gets the sugar and the energy it needs. And so I just wanted to share that because I'm not sure that everyone kind of got when you say glucagon, what that meant was, but those are two hormones that play together.
I would change a little bit what you said, because I think what happens is insulin converts sugar into fat, particularly body fat, whereas glucagon converts body fat into sugar. And so what you want is to be sometimes where you're not converting blood sugar into your own fat and getting fatter and fatter, but actually breaking down your fat so that you keep the blood sugar stable for your brain.
Right. So the intermittent fasting kind of puts you in that balance of your body being as efficient as it can be, playing between those two hormones.
Yes. And I tell you, if there's anything that anybody, there's hopefully more than this in the book, but
there is.
But there is. But if you just do intermittent fasting, your life will improve. I can almost guarantee that.
And I will second that. So the next one, principle 4, is about macronutrients.
And that has to do with not much good comes out of eating too much sugar in your diet. And, there's so many now things about this. Gary Taubes writes about it. There's a great documentary that people who are interested in their heart called thebigfatfix.com should watch. Fats are good for your heart. They're good for the mitochondria. They're the cleanest source of fuel for energy. And eating a lot of sugar, including anything from brown rice to white sugar, all that, in a sense, is still carbohydrates, sugar. Eating more than you need of that, nothing good happens from that. So the appropriate diet is basically high good fat, modest protein, low carbohydrate, high in nutrients.
Yeah, and if anyone's listened to this for more than a week, they know I'm right on board with you there. It's the sugar is not your friend, and not all fats are your friends, but you got to find the healthy fats and you got to figure that out. But just realize, you have been marketed to, and fat is not necessarily a bad thing for you. You have to find that right mix and make that work for you. And if you're doing the whole, like as you've taken us through this, is the nuts, the meats, and again, well-raised meats, and all that. When you start putting all those other principles together, it really does put together kind of a good fat mix. It makes sure that you're getting the good things, because if you're getting them from nuts and from good meat, you're getting what you need, what your body was designed to use?
Yes. So it's got to be grass-fed and grass-finished meat. It's got to be wild fish, pastured eggs, organically grown virgin olive oil, all that. Quality counts. That's why that's the first principle. It's not just any meat, because and the principle really comes down to whatever is good for the cow is probably good for you. So cows don't do well eating cardboard and other cows. They just don't. They get sick, and nobody gets healthy eating sick animals.
Now, the next one, and this is one I have to be honest with you, I'm going to have to do a lot more research on this because, frankly, I don't know a lot about this topic. So you talk a lot about structured water, and I do make sure that most of the water I drink, most of the water I use is spring water. But you talk a little bit more in detail about structured water. So could you talk about water as your fifth principle?
So the water principle also has a lot to do with what I won't go into now, which is why the blood moves in the body if it's not pumped by the heart. And it has to do with the fact that water exists in 4 phases, not just the 3 that we're told about. So this 4th phase of water is called various things, but one could call it structured water. And it forms best when it's, in motion at 4 degrees centigrade and a few other principles. So, it's with water, it's actually very simple, and everybody has a sense of this. And the 2 principles at work is the first one, which everybody gets, which is it's not good to have poisonous stuff in the water, right? Everybody knows that. The poisonous stuff includes chlorine and chloramines and fluoride and Prozac and birth control pills and arsenic and microbes that are pathogens and anything else that is now in our usual water supply. So that has to be removed. So everybody kind of gets that principle. People definitely argue about the best way to do it, but nobody thinks that what I call the stuff in the water that's poisonous is good for human beings to consume. The second principle, which is the one you're talking about with the structure of the water, the best way to see that is if you're going camping and hiking in the, like I once did on the Appalachian Trail or the Gold Coast of Southern Africa. Everybody knows this. If you come upon 2 sources of water, one is a stream that's going fast-moving stream, tumbling down over all these rocks, and right next to it is a pool of stagnant water, right? Which would you drink? And everybody has this intuitive sense, I could correct me if I'm wrong here, that the last thing you want to do is drink stagnant, non-moving water. There's something about the motion of the water, particularly if it's moving over rocks and if it's going in a kind of vortex spiral motion, which purifies the water, even though it's hard to know what you mean exactly by purifying the water. But certainly it tastes better, it tastes smoother, it doesn't grow as many microbes. The fish inherently will go towards moving water. Everybody knows water should be moving, yet 99% of the water that most people drink hasn't moved for, months, maybe years.
It's moving when they drink it. And they sense that it's moving when they drink it because it's coming out of a fountain or it's coming out of a faucet. But you're right, absolutely. For whatever period of time, it may not have.
Right. Non-moving water is dead water. And what do I mean by dead water? Because, it is important to be as precise and, quote, scientific as we can. But what it means is the structure of water starts to degrade, and this smoother exclusion zone, which is a charged state of water, which Gerald Pollack describes wonderfully in this book, The 4th Phase of Water. And for anybody who wants to know more, read my book and then read Pollack's book. So that is also why the water, that's the state of the water in our cells. I often point out, we're told that the water in our cells, now I'm not talking about the blood or the lymph, in our cells is 70% water. The contents of a human cell is 70% water. Now, I was an ER doctor for 10 years, and I've seen hundreds of people cut open or cuts or whatever. I've never once seen water spout out of a human being. And the reason is because the water in the cells is in a structured or gel-like state. In fact, an MRI machine was invented to see if there was a deterioration in this structure of the water. Now, that isn't moving, but that structured water is facilitated by drinking healthy, structured, charged water, even though there's very little research on this. So you start getting into, well, how can I prove this? It's hard. But again, that's the only water that most of the traditional people would drink. They wouldn't drink still water. It's not good for them.
So, and I think, unfortunately for most of us, what we can afford, the best we can do is maybe the mineral water, the spring water that's bottled and served to us. Maybe not optimal, but maybe that'll change over time. But that's where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, that may be true, but there are some simple vortex devices, which I can tell you, I've seen some dramatic changes in people, particularly in the heart. A guy who basically essentially cured his congestive heart failure he took it to an extreme. He got a vortex device, and he literally would put a straw in the vortex, and that's the water he drank. And it sounds kind of laughable, and I must admit I was skeptical, but I couldn't believe the changes in this guy's ejection fraction, which is a very scientific quantitative marker of how much blood was entering and exiting his heart as a result of just drinking structured or vortexed water. And I had no possibility but concluding that made a difference. And if I was going to tell people how to get a better heart, I needed to look into structuring water.
Well, and again, I do hope the science goes there, and I hope that they make those affordable and available, because that would be awesome for all of us. Now, your sixth principle, which again, I'm really remiss to say one is my favorite, but this is among my favorites of the six. So maybe I have six favorites, but is trust your instincts.
Right. One of the tragedies, and I speak a lot about this in the book, that one of the tragedies that I see in modern life is we have been thoroughly convinced to not trust our own instincts or our own sense of life, and rather to trust experts, whether it's political experts, economic experts, medical experts, or whatever. It's some kind of expert. And so when I see a 70-year-old person who comes to me and says, Dr. Cowan, I don't know what to eat, my first thought is that in itself is kind of a tragedy, because at 70, you ought to at least know now, if I eat eggs, I feel good. And if I eat squash, I feel worse, or whatever it is. It could be anything. But essentially, you would have evolved your own diet that works for you, that no expert could say, no, you should eat less carbohydrates or more meat or less meat or whatever it is. That you just simply know because of personal observation and a sense using your own. We are the best measuring device ever created, or however we came here. And you've got to trust that. And nobody, no doctor, no expert can tell you what works the best for you. Some people need more fat, less fat. There's certain guidelines that you can use. Like if you eat too much fat, you get nauseated, etc. If you eat too little, you feel hungry all the time. So there are certain rules that you can use to help you hone your instincts. But at the end of the day, you got to figure this out for yourself.
So it's really just about, if you feel good, if you look good, if you're performing well, you're probably on the right track.
Yes. And you might want to use some, quote, measurements, or like if you eat this way, you can do 10 push-ups. And if you eat only McDonald's, you can do 3. And that's another way of giving yourself feedback. So I'm not against feedback, but I'm a little bit leery of trusting machines too much to tell us that. Your instincts, your sense of it, and after a while, I can tell you, Like, I know right now I need to eat something like this, or it's usually I need to eat more vegetables. And it's almost always right because I feel different after I do it, and nothing else works.
Cool. So it's funny, and I won't share the story right now. I think I've shared it on here before, but my story about meeting my wife, Tammy, is not undifferent from your meeting Linda, of just happening upon her in a place I would have normally been and realizing that was maybe the best thing that ever happened to me and made me a healthier, happier, better person. So really respect to your wife, Linda, and to you. And thank you so much for being on 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. There's no doubt about it.
So if someone wanted to reach out to you, get to know you, learn more about you, or get the book, where would you like for me to send them?
The best place is humanheartcosmicheart.com. All one word, essentially, humanheartcosmicheart.com. And there's a contact us thing. At this point, actually, Linda is the first person who screens those. And if there's a medical thing, it'll get to me. And, depending on the question, I'll do my best to try to answer it. Awesome.
So again, Dr. Cowan, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So before you go, I want to ask you to do two things. One for someone else and one for yourself. This was a really good episode, and I hope that you'll share it with someone through your social media, through conversations, through email, however. But do share this with someone. I think that a lot of folks will get value from this the way that you have. So again, please do share this. And now I want you to do something for yourself. I want you to go check out Surefire Results for Weight Loss. It's a program where I basically compiled all of the things that I typically tell my clients to do as far as base nutrition, base fitness to lose weight. And it's a very simple program, very simple lifestyle changes. It's 28 days, and I guarantee it's going to work for you. Just go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/surefire and check it out today. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet with Maria Emmerich and discuss her book, Their 30-Day Ketogenic Cleanse. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.